This happened about 5 years ago. My mom, dad, and I were camping at Mary Jane Thurston State Park, just outside of Grand Rapids, Ohio. It was sometime around the end of August or the beginning of September, and our campsite was in the front part of the campgrounds. Leading up to the two separate incidents, we occasionally heard what we thought could have been a bird of some kind screaming or screeching up in the trees, or at least it sounded like it was coming from the top of the trees. We'd hear it almost every single night, but in a different location. We'd listen to it in the trees behind us, and then the next night it would come from the other end of the campground. Then the night after, we'd hear it from across the road. I've listened to the sounds of different animals, including owls, to see if it was the noise we were hearing, but nothing was even close. Occasionally, we would hear what sounded like branches being snapped, but we thought nothing of it really. I had my tent, and that detail is essential as it factors into the second incident. The first incident that I want to talk about happened when my dad woke up in the middle of the night to what sounded like someone rummaging through the ice chest between our tents. He said he heard whoever or whatever it was shut the cooler and walk away. He told my mom and me about it the next day. The odd thing was that everything was present in the cooler. Nothing seemed to be missing. The second incident happened the night after the first one, and I had a small TV and game console in my tent. It was like one of those portable ones that you could plug things into. It was pretty cool. I was watching a movie when I heard something approaching our campsite. Whatever went through our cooler, then I think was doing the same thing the next night. I could listen to the ice moving around as it was rummaging through it. I was as still and as quiet as possible, but whoever or whatever was there knew I was awake because it decided to put its massive hand on the side of my tent and push it in just a little bit. I was frozen with fear and didn't know what to do. It felt like forever, but was only about 20 seconds before it took its hand away from my tent and walked away. I didn't even think about it. I was looking everywhere. I looked for tracks the next day the moment light went out, but I didn't see anything. As far as I know, we don't really have bears in this part of Ohio, so I don't think it was a bear. Despite going through it twice, this thing didn't take anything from the ice chest. I was afraid. When it touched my tent and pushed it in a little bit, I think I might have even peed a little bit. We don't think it was a homeless person, and we're pretty sure it wasn't other campers as there wasn't many other people in the campground with us. But I'm not saying it wasn't any of those options. But I'm just a bit freaked out. In 2010, when I was in much better shape than I am now, I hiked the Pinnacle Trail at Table Rock State Park in South Carolina. I was the only one on the mountain in early April, and early in the day. The trail reaches to the top. It took me about 2 hours to get to the top. It was beautiful, and I rested up there for a bit. I had a snack and some water, and then, after some time, I decided to head back down. I was about 30 minutes from the entrance when I noticed I didn't hear a single sound. Nothing at all. I stopped dead in my tracks. There was no wind, no bugs, birds, running water, absolutely nothing. It was like I was in the vacuum of absolute sound being taken away. For context, there is running water and streams all around the trail, and they're usually easily heard and very loud. I tapped my ear with my finger to see if I could still hear, and I could. I looked around, blinking and thinking, what the heck? I guess it's like what a bug feels like when you trap it in a glass jar. Then, out of nowhere, like a baseball hitting you in the face, the smell hit me. Having raised many hunting dogs and pets when I was younger, it was like a doghouse bed that hadn't been cleaned in quite a while. Except it was 10 times more pungent. I almost became sick. There was something there. There was no doubt in my mind, but it stayed hidden. I looked around everywhere. Nothing but the odor was all around me. I carry a pistol in most places I go. I have a concealed carry permit. I didn't even think of drawing it, though. I didn't think it would do any good. I finally booked it out of there. Screw this noise. I felt like I had to get out of there. About 30 yards up, I see a doe eating grass. She looks at me and doesn't seem to be scared, which is very odd. Most deer haul ass when they see you. I continued down the trail like a bat out of hell. The sound came back at some point further down the trail. I caught a young couple entering the park when I reached the entrance. I must have looked like I had seen a ghost or something, maybe even a little bit like a crackhead. They looked at me like I had 3 heads, with one coming out of my ass. I left and went home. I had forgotten all about this until one day I was listening to scary stories I had discovered on YouTube about a year after while painting my house. I stopped immediately when I heard a very similar instance being told. It was like that vacuum or silence someone had experienced while in the woods. I found out later some people call this the Oz effect or the silence. This story took place in Thermopolis, Wyoming. At the beginning of June of 2023, my girlfriend and I stayed there for a week-long vacation. We walked by the Hot Springs State Park River one night after dinner. Across the river and up the bank, the road goes past T Hill. It is named for the letter T and is made of white rock on its side to represent Thermopolis. The year previous, I hiked up this hill. A small portion of the trail is visible from the road, and you can see bits and pieces continuing upward if you look closely. I'm very familiar with it as it took me an hour or so to reach the top, and I have visited Thermopolis and the park many times. Back to the night in question. The sun had just set, some rain was falling, and a storm had passed about an hour or so beforehand. I noticed a bright white-blue light on T Hill as we admired the river. The light was on the established trail moving up. I pointed this light out to my girlfriend. I said it was definitely not a flashlight with the rate of speed it was moving and how smooth it was, as the light was more like a ball than a beam. We both wondered if someone was going on a night hike up a steep, demanding trail in the rain, but we decided that that was probably not the case. The light was moving much faster than any person hiking could. She suggested a person biking up the hill. That was the only logical explanation as far as I could tell. So we stood there and waited to see this person either go around the switchback to continue up the hill or turn back to come down. We returned to our truck and parked it in a lot with a higher vantage point to look for it. The strange light did not reappear, and we waited for easily 20 or 30 minutes. After a short drive back to my mom's house, where we were staying at the time, we told her about what we had seen. She didn't really seem surprised and said the locals and tourists reported strange lights in the hills and mountains visible outside the town and within the park. She also told me that someone had died on the trail years ago, and it was likely many other souls had perished out there as well. Wyoming at night has an unsettling vibe. I can feel it in the pit of my stomach every time I'm out there. It is mostly still a very wild place. The state has the smallest population in the contiguous United States. Lots of paranormal things occur there. The area and surrounding states are notorious for weird activity. I don't have a solid idea of what I saw that night. Maybe a ghost or some kind of extraterrestrial. Or there's the standard explanation, ball lightning or some obscure scientific phenomenon. But no matter what it was, Wyoming is a place in my heart of beauty and somewhat spookiness. I don't even know where to start. I've been listening to your show for quite some time, and I'm still hesitant to share my stories, but I love your channel and it keeps me company throughout very lonely workdays. I spend all my free time outdoors in the woods or at the national and state parks in my area. I live in a tiny rural community on the edge of a game reserve near the Mississippi River's oldest town, and I've been here my entire life. There is something in the woods down here in the state park though, and we are not alone. Off and on my entire life, I had felt like I was being watched when I was out in the woods. Not every time, but enough to pay attention to it in this area. I am not the type of girl you want to grab a hold of. I can hold my own in a fight, and although I am no Doc Holliday, I am very good with a firearm. But what good would a gun do? You can't kill something that is already dead. Enough rambling. One night, my favorite spots to go rock hunting were in the small creeks and streams on the Natchez Trace. The Trace is a historic forest trail in the United States that is roughly 440 miles long. It's absolutely beautiful, and I do recommend people check it out. I started down the route to the creek. It's about 1.5 miles down a dirt path. I used to do this all the time, so I wasn't very worried. I made my way down to the creek with the help of a live oak branch that I've used many times before. I was on a mission that day to find an arrowhead. It was late afternoon, in the summer, so the weather was terrific. A nice gentle breeze, animals rustling in the leaves, and a symphony of songbirds in the forest canopy. I was enjoying myself, arrowhead or not. I hadn't been paying attention to how long or how far I had been walking, when a beautiful agate caught my eye. Super excited, I bent down to wash it off and put it in my bag. When I was washing the agate off, I noticed the only thing I could hear was the water swishing in my hands. No birds, no bugs, no breeze, no animals scurrying on the forest floor. Still kneeling in the creek, I had an overwhelming feeling of heaviness, like someone had thrown a weighted blanket over me. I was afraid to look up. I had the feeling I was being watched from close by. I finished washing my agate off and putting it in my bag, trying desperately to act as if nothing was wrong. I stood up, fake stretched, side to side, trying to scan the edge of the woods nonchalantly. At that moment, my stomach dropped. I did not recognize where I was. There was no way in hell I got turned around. I was walking up the creek and never got out of the water, but for some reason this place did not seem familiar at all. And at that moment, I realized I had gone too far. The sun seemed to be setting relatively fast, and I was getting lightheaded. Then suddenly, from about 10 or so feet behind me, came a clicking sound and a heavy, deep breath with a gurgling snort. I did not want to turn around, but I had to. It was the only way back. The water was flowing nicely and smoothly in the opposite direction I was facing, so I knew my truck would be the other way. I immediately started to pump myself up for whatever I was about to see or experience. This was one of the few times I did not have a gun on me, but I did have my knife just in case. I was prepared to go all macho, especially for somebody stalking me. In this case, I would have felt better if it had been another human being, regardless of their intentions. When I turned around, there was nothing there. I did not know a thing, but the woods were still quiet. There was no sound, but the water was splashing, so I stepped my ass out of there. I had to have been about 4 to 5 miles from my truck. I was 36 miles up the track with no ranger stations or homes nearby. I started to quicken my pace when I noticed I was making a considerable amount of noise for just 2 feet, so I quickly stopped. My heart sunk as I heard the rustling of leaves and grass stop shortly after I did. The clicking and gurgling snorts continued. I know the animals we have in these here woods, and they don't make those noises at all. So I quickened my pace, making a ton of noise running down the creek. Whatever was behind me was running along the bank in what sounded like very significant heavy strides. The clicking continued, getting closer and closer. Just then, whatever was behind me let out a scratchy shriek that made me grab my ears in pain. I removed my hands to hear it jump down into the water. I knew it was close and significant because it sent a surge down the creek. I hit a gear I never even knew I had, and no way in hell I would try to turn around and get a look at whatever this thing was. As I reached familiar surroundings, I could see the live oak getting around the bend of the tree, as if it was reaching out to help me. I knew that at that point the truck wasn't very far away. At the time, I was a pack-a-day smoker of Marlboro Reds, and my lungs felt like they would explode from the pain. So I reached out, grabbed the live oak, and my hand slipped. Just as I caught it again with a better grip, I began to pull myself up. Then I felt something tight and painful, almost like a burn on my leg. I screamed like a mad woman and began kicking like a mule.
Then I pulled away and ran as fast as I could up the dirt path, all the way back to my truck. Halfway down the way, I heard a crow. I noticed my footsteps were the only ones I could listen to and hear again, and realized life had come back to the woods. My heart was somewhat relieved, although my legs were not slowing down. I scratched up my leg badly and I could feel it bleeding, but did not stop to check on it. Instead, I slammed into the side of the truck and got my keys from my hide box, jumped inside, and got the hell out of there, and I have not been back since. Now, whether something had my leg, I do not know, and I cannot say for sure. It could have been an old barbed wire fence or something that cut me on the way there because I was definitely not paying attention as much as I should have. I have heard the clicking before, but I always wrote it off like tree branches or something. One thing is for sure. Always pay attention when the woods go silent, and always bring something to protect yourself. Especially in these state parks, there seems to be something strange going on here. In the fall of 2016, a friend and I decided to go hiking in the late afternoon in a more densely wooded wilderness area in the mountains not far from Fayetteville, Arkansas. Now, these woods were in a state park. My friend Rick was close to 60 at the time and recovering from a triple bypass he had undergone about 16 months earlier. We had been hiking this and other trails for about a year following his operation to strengthen his cardiovascular health. That day, a weekday, I hiked with a bottle of water, my wallet, and my keys, but nothing else. Nothing to protect myself. The trail we picked is a popular weekend hiking spot that we had taken dozens of times before. We were both comfortable with the hike and had never had a problem on that path, or any other for that matter. While Rick is older and at the time a little more feebler after his health problems, I was in my mid-40s, well over 6 foot tall, and in pretty decent shape. So I wasn't worried. The trail we were on is in a state park adjacent to federal parkland. It's an outdoor enthusiast's dream. Most of our trek that day was completely uneventful. We just enjoyed the autumn leaves and chatted casually as the sun dropped lower in the evening sky. We had seen nobody else that day, which was probably to be expected given that we chose to hike late in the afternoon on a weekday. We'd completed about 4 miles of the 6-mile loop, and up to that point it was an uneventful trip. On our way back to the car, and about 2 miles from the parking area, we spotted someone. Through an opening in the trees, I saw a young woman, probably a college student, on the trail ahead of us, and moving in our direction. At first glance, I paid her very little attention. As the distance between us disappeared, that changed. I did not know her, so it could have just been mistaken, but there was something about her posture and expression that seemed off to me. As she got closer, it struck me that she had a semi-panicked look on her face and was moving quite quickly. But she was in athletic gear, so maybe she was just booking it for some cardio. She occasionally turned her head and stared over her shoulder. I followed her eyes and eventually noted another woman about 50 yards behind her. This woman was also walking up the path through the trees. The second woman was not wearing hiking gear. In fact, her clothing struck me as totally inappropriate. It was a warm afternoon and we were well inside a wooded state park area miles away from any homes, but she was wearing semi-formal office casual attire and a light jacket. I thought the clothes must have been second-hand because they were tattered, ill-fitting, and didn't look washed. She was a fit, athletic-looking woman who couldn't have been more than 25 or 30 years of age. It was too bizarre. The clothes were wrong for the trail and they were wrong for someone her age. Everything was off about her. Her shoes struck me as being even more peculiar. When she got closer, I noticed she was wearing scuffed leather flats, casual shoes with no ankle support. I found it completely odd because you don't see people on this trail dressed as she was, and you never see them wearing shoes like that. My hiking partner Rick hadn't appeared to notice anything odd as he was completely involved in the conversation and just kept talking. The second woman briefly glanced up and we made eye contact as she neared us. The alarm bells went off in my head. There was something in her eyes that made me feel uncomfortable down to my core. I don't know what she was thinking if I'm being honest, but I swear she had contempt on her face. Part of me wondered whether I'd offended her by staring, so I diverted my eyes and kept walking. I tried to tell myself that maybe she was homeless, was wearing the only thing she had, and I was just being rude. but the warning bells were still going off in my head. I'm not a paranoid person, really, so having my sixth sense going nuts left me unsettled. I have fantastic peripheral vision, so I turned my face toward Rick and acted like I was listening to him, but I was watching the creepy woman out of the corner of my eye. The moment we passed, she spun her head around to study us, and she slowed her pace. My internal alarms grew louder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come to a stop and drop her face toward the ground. Her body half turned on the trail. It was very odd behavior. Rick and I kept walking, and around 50 yards further we made it around a bend in the path, and I looked back at the woman before the trees obscured her from view. She was still standing there, her face down, but she was staring a hole through us out of the corner of her eyes. That was the first time I realized that I couldn't see her hands. One was inside her jacket pocket, and the other was hidden from view on the other side of her body. It creeped me the hell out. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. For a half mile, I didn't see her again and had begun to wonder whether it was the first woman, the co-ed, that felt the danger as well. Clearly, she had, I thought, and that's why I was practically running through the woods at dusk. It also struck me that the creepy woman had stopped and studied Rick and me like she was deciding whom to follow. We weren't moving as fast. We were walking as quickly as Rick could manage, and he was clearly feebler than the co-ed. Those thoughts amped up my senses and I still felt uneasy, so I periodically checked behind us. At certain points through the woods I could see more than 100 yards. Nothing. I began to worry about the co-ed. My hair stood up for a second time as I felt the strangest sensation of being watched. Again thinking I was paranoid and half mocking myself for being afraid of the creepy woman, I turned my head around to assure myself she was not back there. I was wrong. She was there, following with her head down and moving briskly about 100 yards behind us, but with her hands hidden. I turned my head back to the trail in front of us and we kept walking, still trying to convince myself that there was nothing out of the ordinary happening and that I was just being rude because she was dressed like a homeless woman. About 200 yards further along the path, I turned my head back to Rick and my heart raced a bit. She's closed half the distance. Each time we would walk around a bend and the woods obscured her location, she would emerge much closer to us at the next opening. I told myself again I was just being paranoid, but nevertheless tried to get Rick to pick up the pace a bit. By this time he was clearly aware that we were being followed and he was uncomfortable as well. Although to his credit he did keep talking and act like nothing was happening. With a half mile to go before we reached the parking area, I turned my head once again, and she was just 10 feet behind us. I had not seen or heard her get that close and it freaked me out. I literally jumped. One of her hands was in her pockets and the other was behind her back. I got the distinct feeling that she had some kind of weapon and that she had no fear of me, though I was considerably taller, albeit several years older. There was no mistaking her demeanor. She meant to do us harm, or at the very least she intended to intimidate us. I weaved my car keys between my knuckles of my right hand, handed my water bottle to Rick, and made an obvious fist with my left hand. With a half mile left in our hike, I thought to myself, if this is nothing, she'll pass us and move on, as clearly she's moving a lot faster than we were. I was accustomed to people overtaking us when I walked with Rick, but she didn't pass, and never acted like she knew we were there, which was the creepiest part. I kept my head turned toward her as I walked and tried to get her to make eye contact, but she didn't look me in the eyes at first. She kept acting like neither Rick or I were on the path just a few feet ahead of her, and she slowed to follow closely behind. I was completely unnerved, and that made me even more angry. I wanted her to see how pissed I was and to convey with a look that messing with me was a mistake. When she finally did make eye contact with me, I glared and clenched my fist. There was an instant when I couldn't read her expression. She was simply blank, but as she studied my face, she appeared very agitated and a little less confident in herself. I was conveying one thing in the look of my face: back off. And at this point, I didn't give a damn if I appeared rude. She apparently thought better of whatever she was doing and slowed her pace so the distance between us grew to about 20 feet. But she was tense and kept whatever was in her hand hidden behind her back. I never saw her hands, but I know she had a weapon of some kind, and I believe she meant to do us harm, but I also know she recognized that I was ready to fight. I was mentally preparing to charge her if I saw a gun or a knife, as I knew Rick couldn't outrun her. I thought to myself, I just must surprise her. I also realized that I needed to have her in front of us. A few feet further, a quarter mile away from where our car was parked, she was still stalking us, and I had enough. I was in equal measures afraid and furious. I told Rick that we were going to stop and let her pass, loud enough for her to hear it. Just as I was getting ready to stop on the trail and make her walk in front of us, she veered into a small clearing, plowing through waist-high brush, crossed a ditch, and scurried through a line of trees to a road that ran through the woods between the main road and the parking area. I kept my eyes on her the entire time. She had a car. It was parked alongside the little service road, partially hidden by shrubs, not in the parking lot. The last time we made eye contact was just before she climbed in her car. It was clear from the expression on her face that she was very angry. I glared at her, expressing my own anger, but I kept walking. When her car started to drive away, Rick got quiet before asking me, what in the hell was she doing? Did she have a gun? I told him I didn't know. I never saw a weapon. We walked back to our car without saying another word. Once the engine was on and the doors were shut, we chatted a bit more about how it was pretty creepy. We did decide to report it to the authorities and to make sure to have them check on the poor co-ed. To this day, I have no idea what the creepy woman was planning to do. Rob us, harm us, scare us, I have no idea. I am just thankful she decided better on it. I have hiked that trail more than 50 times since then, but I've never seen her again.
It is rather funny that I just found out about your show, considering I'm a real-life swamp dweller myself. I live in a hamlet that's smaller than a village named Swamp, and an actual swamp. My house is on the far outskirts of it, all alone in the middle of the woods with a bubbling creek running around the house and 2 sloping hills on either side. I call myself the real-life Shrek, but on to the story. This happened at this house around 25 years ago, when I was around 10. Back then, the house was a holiday house, a refurnished watermill that had been in the family for over 200 years. The time the story takes place, or at least the first part of it anyway, was summertime. And during that childhood time off, it was, of course, summer break. Even the parents took vacation days so we could all enjoy our time together. And it wasn't just us, but also a friend of mine at the time, and his mother was also there. We played, ran in the woods and the swamp together, explored, and so on. But the event in the story happened on the 3rd day. It was right after lunchtime, or so I was surprised, when all of the adults started displaying extreme lethargy, and even I, rather sleepy and tired for some reason out of nowhere, which was never the case, said that we should all take an afternoon nap, and everybody else agreed. It was strange, since we all talked about how busy we wanted to stay that day, when I noticed that a friend of mine, who will stay unnamed, didn't look sleepy or lethargic at all. So I wanted to see what was going on with them. I honestly felt bad about leaving him awake alone, but my head hit the pillow pretty hard and I was about to fall asleep. But that's when I noticed something, and I forced myself to stand up again and go down the stairs towards the exit. When I went to the outside, it seemed like it was too bright even for the middle of the day. I stepped on the veranda and saw my friend walking toward me annoyedly. I didn't know what was happening or why he looked annoyed, but something told me to look up. There was some voices in my head, so I did. I saw straight up high in the sky, too high it was beyond the clouds. Around these clouds was a cigar-shaped thing. I thought it was a UFO, and I was looking at it in broad daylight. I thought it could be a plane for just a moment, but it had no wings and was hovering completely still. In shock, I looked at my friend and yelled, "Look up! Do you see that?" He looked up, but his expression remained the same, and as we both looked, the craft started moving forward, slowly, at this, speeding up, faster and faster, until it zipped away so quickly I couldn't believe it. Like one of those science fiction movies. I swiftly ran into the house and tried to wake up my mom and tell her what we saw. But, well, no one would believe 2 kids that they just saw a UFO, especially if one of them wasn't even trying to sound convincing. And that was it for a very, very long time. I tried explaining the story off as some weird hallucination, but after some time I gave up. Many years later, I stopped being with that friend and meeting with them, and I had a strange revelation. I suddenly remembered all the events all over again, but this time some very scary and questionable details emerged. First of all, the moment I looked through the exit, I saw the very bright light. I saw my friend at the end of the grass clearing by the creek. He seemed so distant, and by him standing was two weird figures. One was tall, about 6 feet tall, and the other was only about 3 feet tall. They were talking when the tall one noticed me staring at them, and then the two looked very upset at the friend when he turned towards me and started walking while the other two vanished in the yellow-whitish flash beaming skywards. And that's where my previous memory resumed, only knowing I had to look skyward to see the UFO flying off. After this revelation, a few more things started clicking in my mind, such as why the patch of ground where those two stood over had a discolored patch of grass for nearly 2 decades, why that friend never again returned to the house, why everyone was supposed to be passed out for whatever reason, for whatever they were doing, and how I somehow interrupted them. But why didn't they get in the house? Or why during the day? Why did they stay so far away from the house? Later I learned from my grandmother that the valley the house was built on used to be a refuge for people hiding from raids, and that there were plenty of shrines and the like around. Also, a self-proclaimed witch visited the place, calling it a ley-line nexus and a safe place from evil. But I'm not so sure how much you can believe in that stuff. It's definitely a strange and crazy memory that I'll forever remember. This story could have been more spooky, sensational, long, and interesting, but in my experience, it was something that changed my life forever. In May 2022, I worked at a gas station and truck stop in a small town outside of Houston in Dallas. For most of my time working there, I was a night shift employee from 3 to 11 p.m. To make this short, let me add a little background on the business and some minor details about the town I was in. The town is rather small and rural. The closest shopping center is quite a few hours away, and one of the only grocery stores in town is Dollar General. The store I worked at was right next to an interstate that went throughout Texas, so we got a lot of customers, especially on weekends. We typically saw a lot of truckers, churchgoers, and people traveling with their little league teams. Now that the basics are covered, I can tell you about the events that took place that May. On May 12th, around 1:50 p.m., I got ready for work. It was a typical day, thus far until I got an emergency alert stating, "Escaped armed convict male." This was strange, considering the nearest prison to me was an all-female prison and was more than 45 minutes away. Despite the alert, everyone was still required to attend their shift. 3 o'clock rolls around and we're all standing around the break room waiting to clock in. I remember everyone being super on edge, people whispering about the Amber Alert, trying to get more details about what was happening. Nonetheless, we got to work. Typically, we get 2 breaks that were about 15 minutes each, equating to 30 minutes in total. This was awful, but we made do. This isn't really important, but it does add context. We were not allowed to go outside for our breaks due to the alert and for our safety. The night shift crew was hands down the best group of people to work with, but on the first night of the unpleasant week, it was not the A-team. Once we clocked in, it was like there was a floodgate that opened for all the police and TDCJ, Texas Department of Criminal Justice officers, to come in. We had hundreds and hundreds of people coming in for some barbecue sandwiches and simple pizzas. And one of my favorite coworkers was the front end of it all. She was helping people left and right while making sure she was doing her shift leading duties. I ran back and forth from the jerky case to the deli case, trying to get as many people out as possible. It was a very crazy night. Everyone searching for this convict was passing through our store, just trying to get nourishment for the long night ahead. That night, my coworker and I only got a break each after helping what felt like 1,000 officers, but it was not in vain. We did end up getting some information from the people on the search. Things like what this man looked like and what he was going to prison for. There were possible ideas of where this guy was heading, and they thought it was towards San Antonio, about an hour away from where we were. Now, I need some more background on the town I was in. Like I said before, the town was very rural. There were farms and ranches everywhere and tons of wooded areas. Also, to mention again, we were right on an interstate, so there were plenty of places to hide and run. I will spare you all the boring details of my week and get into the horrifying part. The search for this waste of life lasted 3 whole weeks. On June 2nd, he broke into a ranch house only a few miles from town. While in there, he managed to find a razor, shave his head, and cleaned up his face. He ate the food that the family had left. It's unknown how long he was in the house or if he had been wandering around and just found this empty one. Well, that day, a family of 5 walked into the ranch and found this piece of scum in there. The convict murdered this family. A grandfather and his 4 grandsons were brutally murdered. He shot them and then robbed them of the grandfather's truck and some guns. A relative hadn't heard anything from the family in a couple of hours and knew of the situation that was going on in this town. They called the police, and when they found the bodies, there was a national alert that went off telling everyone to be on the lookout for a white truck. This was difficult for every officer because there were so many surrounding towns, and they couldn't even know what direction or how long ago this person had left. I don't know how they did it, or what efforts they exhausted, but they managed to find the truck and set out spike strips to pop the wheels. The convict got out of the vehicle and started shooting at the police, who returned shots. Eventually their shots landed, and the man was declared dead. 3 weeks of torment for everyone in my town was finally over. This guy managed to kill 5 innocent people, children. This man killed children. In Texas, we have the death penalty, and I genuinely believe he got what he deserved. My mom told me once that it was over. There was a photo of his body on the internet, and to this day it's still on Twitter. I look at that photo sometimes, and honestly, I feel like the trapped air in my lungs came out at the same time. This idiot was dead. This happened about a year ago and remained in the top 3 of the scariest moments of my life. I was living in a rural county town in the mountains. It was so rural that there was only one road to take you in and out of the city. About 50 miles of pitch-black cliffs, fields, and the occasional farm. At the beginning of this road, when you first leave the big city, a vast gas station is always packed. This will be important. My mom and I had seen the midnight showing of some movie, and were heading home. We often stopped at the gas station to get a drink and fill up on gas for the long ride home. As we were leaving, I vaguely noticed a dingy green Jeep pull out behind us, but I put this out of my mind. People came and went from businesses all the time. The Jeep drove behind us for about 5-10 minutes, keeping a reasonable distance. Again, it's really not that weird, but suddenly the car comes flying past us and down the way. My mom, who is driving, just scoffs and rolls her eyes. We were driving a comfortable 50 miles per hour, but those who knew the roads well would often go over 100, even at night, and zoom past anyone going slower. Our annoyance at the unsafe driving quickly turns into anxiety. The Jeep is pulled over on the side of the road with its hazards on. The back half of this car is partially in the road. And there's some sort of man's arm sticking out the driver's side window, gesturing for us to pull over. My mom doesn't slow down and just goes around him. We are both on edge, but it only intensifies as he flies past us again, pulls over and gestures for us to pull over. He does this once more before things get genuinely terrifying. After we pass him the 3rd time, he tailgates us at least 60 miles per hour. He's so close that his headlights aren't even visible in the rear view mirror, only the vague shape of his silhouette behind the windshield. He blares on his horn every few seconds, sticking his arm out the window to wave at us. This carries on for a half an hour. My mom is starting to hyperventilate, constantly increasing in speed as she tries to escape. I'm sobbing and clutching a pocket knife to make myself feel somewhat better, more than anything. And even though I'm not proud of it, I'm screaming at her, "Don't you dare pull over!" If you've ever seen the movie Rest Stop, that was all that was going through my mind. I could only picture us getting murdered or worse on the side of a dark, lonely road in the middle of nowhere. There's no service until you hit town, and that we couldn't call police or anyone for quite some time. But just as I'm about to throw up from the nerves, the man slams on his brakes, turns around, and returns the way he came. We went the rest of the way home in silence. My mom and I talked about it for quite a long time the next day, and we figured he had seen us, two lone women, driving down a dark road and thought we would be easy pickings, and he would have been right. Some people I've told this story to suggest that we dropped cash or a receipt at the gas station and they were just trying to be a good Samaritan and return it to us. But let's be real, I highly doubt that. Nobody's trying to chase us down at 1 a.m. on a dark country road. Nobody who does that has good intentions. Nobody's going that hard to give you a receipt or some sort of cash you dropped. Here's the weird thing. A few weeks later, this same Jeep did the same thing to a group of men carpooling to work at 7 a.m. If he's going to do these strange activity with 4 men during the daybreak, it makes me wonder what his intentions are. First off, I would like to start by saying that I am not a professional writer by any means, but have always been attracted by everything paranormal. I was not always the bravest person as a kid, but I liked it all even still. I have experienced many things throughout my life, some things that seem like they are from a movie or a book. This time I'll be telling you of a more mild and a little less strange thing that happened to me while walking home one night. Before I start, I will give you a little bit of background, so you better understand my story. I was born and raised in a small town in Mexico. Everyone knew everyone, and even though we had cars, we had all mostly walked everywhere. There was crime, but it was exceedingly rare, and nothing violent really ever happened. I am the youngest of 5, and my parents were rarely ever home. This meant I was able to stay up late and go pretty much anywhere I wanted. My hometown is in sort of a valley with most of the town on one side of the tallest hills. My house was on a block right on the foothills of the steepest hill of my street, directly perpendicular to the 2 main streets leading up to it. One of these streets was essentially a main road. It was used to go up to a hill which was used for religious traditions. Anyway, this main road was mostly populated by family, with my grandmother on my mom's side of the family living near the middle of the hill. Her house itself was small, but the plot was big and had my aunt's houses scattered around it. This was still quite a long walk from my street, probably 5 minutes of walking. My family was a very typical Mexican family, and would gather at her house pretty much every single night. On one night, I ended up staying way past my usual time with a few cousins. By the time I started heading home, it was well past midnight. There were street lights, but they were very spaced out along the street, which was blocked off by a bunch of trees, making my area very dark. It was creepy, especially for a kid, but the moon was out and it helped ease my nerves just a bit. I began walking downhill toward my house the entire time. I just kept feeling weird, like I was being followed. I did not necessarily feel like I was in danger, I guess, but I felt very uneasy. The entire walk, my heart felt like it was going to jump into my throat. I kept walking down the street, having to look back and around every so often. Eventually, I reached the corner, turned toward my house, and now I was on my street. There's been a house that has been abandoned for an exceptionally long time. It has always given me the creeps, and it was the 3rd house from the corner. I was just about to walk by it. Every time I walked by, I would always walk on the opposite side of the street, which did not even have a sidewalk. I would have walked through that same path that night, but this time it was blocked off by these huge piles of sand and dirt, probably some kind of construction work nearby. That, combined with a huge delivery truck parked on the curb belonging to my neighbors, forced me to walk in the middle of the street. As I approached the house, I had to mentally prepare and give myself the courage to walk in front of it. My heart began racing. I was always scared of the house, but for some reason, that night just seemed so much worse somehow.
I forced myself to keep walking, and as I did, I heard someone call me from the direction of the house. I froze, my heart in my mouth, and turned to look, but I did not see anyone or anything. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I began breathing again, and I had been apparently holding my breath. I was about to start walking again when I heard the voice again this time. I turned to look at a boy. He looked to be about my age at the time, maybe a little bit younger. It struck me as odd more than anything to see a kid my age standing right next to me. I did not even think twice about the fact that I could see him perfectly even though he was standing in the dark. No lights coming from an abandoned house, and even a tree blocking the moon and streetlight. He kept standing there unmoving for a few more moments, not saying a word, just kind of staring at me. The whole time I was trying to process what was going on. He spoke again, asking me to go with him, saying we would play together. I kept trying to speak, but could not seem to form words. It felt like hours went by. The whole time I was frozen in place, just staring at this kid, my racing mind, and now realized he seemed to be glowing. I began to tremble the entire time. I kept trying to move, to scream, but I just couldn't. I couldn't even move to run. I wanted to get away desperately. That kid stood there staring back at me, not moving, not blinking. He spoke one more time before walking a few steps closer to me. He seemed to pass like a shadow or something as he walked. His figure turned dark and then became bright again. As this happened, he called my name, my full name, and then I realized he looked like me somehow. This shook to my core. I jerked back at the sight of this. It was me, but the eyes were all wrong. They looked like they were full of hatred. I regained control of myself. I screamed no at whatever this thing was and ran faster than I ever have before in my entire life. I still have no idea what that thing was. It didn't seem to follow me, and I never saw it again after that. It still scares me to think back to that day. People ask all the time here to try to figure out what it is that they saw, but I honestly kind of don't want to know. Anyway, if you do decide to read this on your channel, thank you so much for your time. So I live in a small town inland of the coast of New South Wales. I say in a town, but the house is situated a few kilometers out of the town. It is the kind of area you can see your neighbors in the distance, but you would really have to be screaming bloody murder for anyone to really hear you. A few more kilometers up the road, and it turns to the solid bush and national park. It is an old dirt road with trees on either side. Quiet, apart from a few dirt bike riders who go there mostly on weekends, and the occasional lost car, full-wheel drive, or person collecting wood. So for me, it was the perfect place to walk my dogs. On the day in question, I was out with my two dogs, a Great Dane and a Husky, and my mom's dog, a Scotty Terrier. My Husky likes to misbehave, so to stop her from taking off into the bush at the smell of a kangaroo, she is on an extender leash. My Dane is loyal to the core, so he is off leash, and so is the Scotty. She can be a pain and run off, but usually comes back. So this bush road has what it is called fire roads. I believe they were put there as an escape route, just in case if people get stuck in bushfires, but I'm not entirely sure. These little beat-up paths are 20 times tougher than the already rough dirt road I walk along. I was heading back towards home at this stage when suddenly all the dogs freeze up. For a moment, I thought it must have been a kangaroo or a wallaby, and instinctively grabbed my Husky's leash tighter. She always pulled my arm off when she saw or smelt a kangaroo, but they all stood frozen. I could see the fur on my Dane's back standing on end as they stared ahead towards the fire trail that branched off. For a moment, I thought it must have been a person and they were on edge because they had not expected to see someone. But as I took the time to look at what the three of them were staring at, I finally saw it. a brown-colored shadow in the thinner area of trees before the dirt track about 15 meters away. Now, I walk this road nearly daily, so I knew each damn log in this area, and it was not something I had seen before. This was confirmed when the thing suddenly shot off and moved. It was fast, like abnormally fast, the kind of speed you would expect for someone on a motorbike. But there was no motor. In fact, despite my straining ears, I could not hear a sound. No cracking of sticks, no rustling of branches. It just took off into the thicker trees after standing there and watching me for a good 10 seconds or so. I was sure I had to be going mad, but as I looked at the dogs, all their heads were turned, staring in the same direction this thing had vanished. It took me another 30 seconds, standing, listening, before I finally managed to move forward towards the spot this thing had been. I had to pass it to get home. As I walked past it, the dogs all acted very strange. My normally brave husky would not go near the spot, kind of sniffing at it from a distance, then pulling ahead. The Dane did a full circle of the spot, going to the furthest point on the other side of the road to avoid it. His tail was tucked between his legs, and the Scotty followed him, cowering in his shadow. I had never seen them act like this before. Normally, if there was an animal or a scent, they would all barge each other to sniff it, but they wanted nothing to do with this spot. If it were a person, my Dane would normally go into defense mode and stand guard, so I do not think that is what this was. Walking in this area so often, I knew the sounds of kangaroos, wallabies, birds, snakes, even feral deer. But this thing? It moved like it did not touch the ground. Not a sound. Had the dogs not been there and reacted at the same time, I would have thought I was just imagining it or I was insane. But the silence of the bush after, it made me feel not so right. The whole way back, I just felt like I was being watched. I kept looking back over my shoulder, but I kept seeing and hearing nothing. As I left the bushy area, I began to feel more at ease and the dogs began to relax. Honestly, I don't know what I saw that day. There isn't much on Australian paranormal stuff except for yowies and spirits. But this figure was too big for a person. It seemed wide and solid, more like that of a bear on its hind legs. It had a full build, and it seemed very tall. But clearly, there aren't any bears or any animals like that in Australia. So, what did I see? What did my dogs see? It must have really spooked them, because I have never seen them act that way, and they have never acted that way again. Then again, I have made sure I have walked with more people more often. While I felt uncomfortable and nervous, I do not know if I was in danger or whatever it was. I mean, it did not attack me, though I felt like it followed me for a while. Either way, I certainly will not ever be going there without my dogs. About 3 years ago, I lived in a small Indiana town. Even as a kid, I always wanted to live there. It is the perfect town. Not too big, but everything is within a few minutes' drive. Groceries, bowling, movies, and bars. The house I rented at the time was on a quiet street that sat at the very bottom of a valley. I never really knew anyone around me other than the neighbors that lived just north of me. After a couple of years of living there, I was sitting on my roof porch one evening when I see this girl that I've never seen before. I could tell that she clearly was not from around there. She was kind of a hippie-looking girl, and you really did not see that in a small town like this. She was walking down the sidewalk with her phone trying to get service. She turned and asked me if I knew of a good spot to get cell service. I told her it was hard because of the way the valley was, and the only way I normally got service was by Wi-Fi calling through my internet provider. She kept walking, and that was the last I had ever seen of her. A few minutes later, the neighbor that lived next door came over to me and asked if I knew who that girl was. I told her no and what happened with the girl asking about the cell phone service. My neighbor then proceeded to tell me that that girl was actually some kind of paranormal investigator from Texas. She and a couple of her friends were paid to come to this town every year by some neighbors a little further up the street. My neighbor began to tell me all these weird stories that came out of the house, and that apparently there was proof of it all. Doors opening and closing on their own, digital clocks changing from numbers to words, and even some recordings of people talking to spirits or ghosts apparently. Of course, I took this all with a grain of salt. I am always down for a good ghost story, but I'll be honest, I've never really fully believed in them. As far as I knew, the investigators stayed for a few days before they took off back to Texas. I never heard of them finding or discovering anything really. A couple of weeks went by and I forgot all about this. I was working the night shift at the time at a state prison not far from Indianapolis. I would come home every day at about 7 a.m., take a shower, and go right to bed. Suddenly, I started having very vivid dreams, paranormal types of dreams. Usually something was chasing me or attacking me, but I could never quite see them. I would eventually scare myself awake, sit up in bed until I calmed down for a little bit, and then I would go back to sleep until it was time to get back up and ready for work. This happened for a few weeks and I did not think anything of it other than just having some nightmares. Then the sleep paralysis started. I always had my phone sitting up in a way that I could just roll over and be able to see the time on the always-on display. I would begin having these same nightmares again, where something would either be chasing me or attacking me or something of the like, but I could not see what it was or where they were coming from. Then I would try to wake up, and I would open my eyes just enough, and I was able to look at my phone, but other than that, I was unable to move. What really freaked me out, though, was that I could see something floating in the corner of my bedroom just above my phone. It did not have a face, but it would just sit there in the corner of the ceiling, looking down at me. I would eventually go back to sleep and wake up and get ready for work when my alarm went off. To be honest, I was kind of enjoying it in a weird way. I always described it to people as going through a haunted house. I am scared to death while it is happening, but after I wake up I just kind of laugh it off and thought, man, that was wild. This was happening on an almost daily basis. Every day would be the same thing around the same time, anywhere between 10 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. In 2018, I started a new job at a university and moved closer to my job. I got a new 2-bedroom apartment and I've lived there ever since. I have never had these dreams or sleep paralysis since. Could any of that been related to the neighbors that lived up the street from me?